Hello, welcome to 123stitch.com. My name is Leslie. If you're joining us for the first time, thank you so much for being here. And if you've seen any of our previous videos, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing something just a little bit different. You'll notice I have this lovely setup here in front of me, and today I'm going to show you how to make one of my favorite small quilting projects. Now, I don't know about you, but one of my favorite summer treats is a pint of ice cream. However, half the time my hands get too cold when I'm holding it, and I end up wrapping like a kitchen towel around it. One of my friends showed me how to make something that will solve this problem. It's one of these little double-sided fabric ice cream pint holders. You can make it a couple different ways. As you'll notice, I also have this larger bowl version that you can use, for example, if you microwave a bowl, soup or mac and cheese or something like that, and then it's hot to hold. So you can use one of these to hold something hot, like a bowl, or one of these to hold some cold ice cream. Now, I'm still fairly new to quilting, but one of my favorite things to make is something like this, a little household object that comes together pretty quickly but serves a functional purpose in your home. So today I'm going to show you step by step how to make one of these, and the first thing we're going to do is go over all of the materials that you're going to need. Okay, now the first thing you're going to need is the fabric. I have here two different types of fabric. You're going to want two different patterns. You could use the same fabric for both sides if you want, but I think it's more fun if you make it double-sided. And you're going to want to cut this out into 10-inch squares. Now you can definitely use pre-cut fabric for this, and that will make your life a lot easier. Personally, I didn't have any pre-cuts available to me, so I just went ahead and cut out my fabric. So you're going to need two 10-inch squares. Then for the inside, you're going to want two pieces of batting, and you can cut this out into a little 8x8 square. Basically, you just want it a little bit smaller than your fabric that's going to be on the outside. You can use pretty much any batting for this. I just chose a low loft needle punched cotton batting, and that's going to be what I use for the insulation to kind of form that inner layer of my project. Then beyond that, you're going to need your most basic quilting tools. So obviously I have in front of me my cutting mat and my sewing machine. You're also going to want a rotary cutter, some kind of marker or pencil. This one that I'm going to be using is water soluble. A little tiny pair of scissors. I also have a pin cushion with some pins, and then you're going to want a couple different sizes of rulers. I have here a very large ruler and a little square ruler. You don't have to have a cutting mat. Personally, I think it's very helpful, so those are the tools that I'm going to be needing to create my little bowls. Now, before I start showing you how to make this, let me give you a closer up view on what exactly we're going to be doing today. So as you can see, I have my little double-sided bowl shape here. And you'll notice that there's a couple different darts in the fabric, and that's going to be what gives it that bowl shape. So it's pretty quick and simple, should take about 20-ish minutes, and I'll show you exactly how we get to this. Okay, so our first step is we're going to take our two 10-inch squares of fabric, and we're going to lay them right side facing down, wrong side facing up. And then we are going to take our two 8-inch squares of batting, and we are going to just lay them on top, just like so. Okay. Then once we have that, we are going to take one of them and our longer ruler, and we are going to draw diagonal lines across. So I'm just going to do my best to line the corners up just like that, and then I'm going to take my marker and just draw a diagonal line across. Now, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. The good news is this doesn't have to be completely symmetrical for it to work, which is good for me. So just going to draw like that. So I have my two little diagonal lines, and then I'm going to do the same thing to the other piece of fabric. So then once you have those diagonal lines drawn, all you're going to do is you're going to sew along this line to connect the batting to each individual piece of fabric. So once you've sewn those lines, it's going to look a little bit like this. So you'll notice that I have my lovely little slightly uneven symmetrical lines going across my fabric. Then I'm just going to take my little tiny pair of fabric scissors here, and I'm going to snip off the ends of the threads on both pieces of fabric. Just like that. Okay, so then once you have your pieces of fabric all cleaned up, looking nice, we can move on to the next step. I'm going to set the green one to the side for now, and we are going to do this one. So all you're going to do is fold it in half like so. So you'll have your two little diagonal lines going up like this, and you're just going to want to make sure that your fabric is laying evenly. So I'm just going to try and make sure that it looks pretty even. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. This project is pretty forgiving, and if you're using a pre-cut piece of fabric, it's even easier. Then I'm going to take my smaller ruler, and this is where you can kind of have some fun with it. So depending on what measurements you use for your darts is going to be what gives you those different sizes. So we're going to make the ice cream pint size. So for that, we are going to measure 2 inches up and then 3 inches over. So I'm going to line my ruler up with my fabric, make a little mark there, so that's 2 inches up. Then I'm going to make a little mark here, so 3 inches over. And then I'm just going to use my ruler to draw a diagonal line to connect those 2 points. Then I will do the same thing on the other side. So once again, we're making that ice cream pint shape, so it's going to be a little bit taller. So we're going to measure 2 inches up, and then we are going to measure 3 inches over. And then draw your little diagonal line to connect. And then you'll do the exact same thing on your other piece of fabric as well. So now that I have my lines drawn on my 2 pieces of fabric, we are going to go ahead and sew these together. Now you'll notice that on the original diagonal lines that I made, here I'll show it on this one so you can see a little bit better, I didn't quite go all the way to the corners. I really just did it where the batting is. However, for these diagonal lines, you are going to want to go and sew all the way across so that both pieces of fabric are sewn together. Okay, so now that we have sewed along these little dart lines, we are going to be cutting off these little excess corners here. So you'll use your little scissors to trim off the edges of the thread as normal. Then we are going to cut here. So I'm going to take this one, and I will take my little ruler, and where this little line is here, let me flip it over so you can see the marker line, I'm going to be measuring out a 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to line that diagonal up with my ruler. Then I'll take my rotary cutter here, and I'm going to be cutting off this little excess corner fabric. Now this might take a second just because you're cutting through a few different layers of fabric here, but then you'll just have this little corner. You can toss that to the side. That's trash now. And then I'll come over here, do the same thing to this corner. So line up that little 1/2 inch. Then you're going to take your rotary cutter and just cut that little corner right off. So then you're going to end up with one of these little weird guy shapes. Okay, so now that we've made those diagonal cuts on both pieces of our fabric, we're going to make the next row of darts. So what you're going to do is you are going to open up the fabric here, just like this, and then you're going to fold the corners up. So you want to line up your 4 corners, just like that, and you can kind of press it down, and then you'll have this kind of awkward seam in the middle sticking up, but you can just fold that to one side, whichever way it wants to go, and you'll just kind of press it down. Might take you a second to get your fabric all sorted, but then you're just going to do the same thing with your other piece of fabric. So you just open it up, and then you're just going to line your 4 corners up like so. You're just going to fold it down, press that little seam down just like this. This is where pins can come in handy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and pin my fabric together just so it doesn't move around at all. Okay, now that I have my fabric pinned, we are going to draw the lines for the next set of darts. Once again, we will be using the same measurements as before. So we are going to measure 2 inches up like that, and then 3 inches over. You'll notice I'm not being completely precise with my measurements. That's okay, it doesn't have to be exactly right. But then once I have those 2 markings, I will go ahead and draw my diagonal line, and then I will do the same thing on the other side. 2 inches up and 3 inches over. Now, if you want to change the size and shape of your bowl, you'll just change these measurements here. So the 2 inches up and the 3 inches over is going to make that ice cream pint size. But if you want to make the bowl size, it'll be a little bit different, and I'll leave those instructions down below in the description box. There we go, we got 2 little diagonal lines. I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing to my other piece of fabric. All right, now I have my diagonal dart lines on both pieces of fabric. I'm gonna go ahead and sew along these edges. Once again, I'm gonna be sure to sew along here as well, just so that I get both pieces of fabric and then all layers of batting. Okay, now once you've sewn these dart lines and you've clipped off any excess thread, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing that we did previously. So we are going to cut off these little excess corners here. So once again, I'm just going to take my ruler and measure out a 1/2 inch from that line, take my rotary cutter, and then I'm just going to cut off those corners. Sometimes it can be just a little bit stubborn since you are cutting through multiple layers of fabric and batting. Flip it around, do the same thing on this side. So I'm going to cut off that little excess corner, and then I will be left with something looking a little bit like this. Okay, so now that I have the corners cut off of my fabric here, we're going to get to the fun part of putting these together. So I'm going to go ahead and set this guy up open like this. So as you can see, I kind of already have this fun little bowl shape coming together. Then I'm going to take my other piece of fabric and I'm going to flip it. So I'm going to put the batting on the inside and make sure that my fabric is facing right side out. Kind of make sure all of your corners are pointing out. Then I'm going to put these two little guys together. So just kind of smush them around. And then what we want to make sure is that our corners are lining up. So you can kind of see here that it doesn't fit together perfectly. Now, if you have pre-cut fabric, it's more likely to fit together perfectly. Since I cut my own, it might be a little bit off in some areas. But what I'm going to do is go through and pin this together so that way I have some nice even lines. All right, now I have my lovely creation all pinned here. Please ignore how haphazard my pins are. But what we're going to be doing is going and sewing a seam just all the way around. Now you can do this as a 1/4 inch or a scant 1/4 inch seam, but really you just want to make sure that you have a seam going all the way around. You're going to kind of curve it around these different points and go over all of the seams. Just make sure that you leave a space at the end. I usually leave one whole little side here that isn't sewn together, so that way you can flip it inside out. So I'm going to go sew it together now. Okay, so now that I have my seam going all the way around, definitely not perfect, what we're going to be doing is we're just going to trim these corners right here. So you're just going to trim off this little bit of excess fabric. So I'm just going to use my little teeny tiny scissors for this. Just going to kind of trim it off. That way, when you flip it inside out, you have slightly more rounded corners. Just like that. Okay. So now we get to do the very fun part of flipping it in and out. Like I said, I left this little bit of space right here so that I can do so. So I'm going to flip it inside out. All right, so now that I spent a few minutes fighting with it, I got it flipped all the way inside out. So we have our lovely little ice cream pint holder here. Now the very last step is I'm going to do a finishing stitch all around the seam. So where I left that opening, I'm just going to kind of fold the fabric in here to make a finished edge so that way I don't have that raw hem there. And then starting from there, I'm going to go just all the way around and just do a little simple stitch all the way around the outside. All right, now I have finished my final seam. It's definitely not perfect. I had to stop and restart a few times because it kept getting stuck on these seams right here. But there we have it, a finished ice cream bowl holder that is reversible. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you had a good time learning how to make one of these fun little projects for yourself. Make sure to give this video a like if you enjoyed it and leave a comment down below letting me know what your favorite little project is to make.